What if I told you former DEP Commissioner Sean LaTourette wasn't the first public official to stand before Trenton City Council and make the case for regionalizing the water system? About 6 months earlier, Mayor Reed Gusciora did exactly that. Hi, I'm Mark Leckington, and this is the podcast from the Mains of Trenton, where we break down what's really happening inside a public utility that state officials have warned is at risk of imminent collapse. In today's episode, we're going to rewind that moment. We'll watch the mayor's pitch, listen to questions from City Council, and then do what hasn't been done yet. Add the missing context, the details, and the reality behind the promises. My good friend Jacque Howard joins me once again. Jacque's the founder of Trenton 365, Jacque's Reach, and Jaw Media. He brings a perspective that you're not going to hear anywhere else. If you want to go deeper, the show notes are on Substack. We've included additional documents, extra content that we didn't have time to cover, and trust me, a post from the Water Works Public Information Officer that you're going to want to see for yourself. Let's get into it. Jacque, welcome back to the podcast. Thanks for joining me today.
It's my pleasure, man. And I want to publicly also say, it's nice to see you taking a deep dive. You are a personality that when you get into something, you really get into it. And with that, it's nice to see that you're taking this really deep dive into podcasting and addressing issues and concerns that not only are important to you, but to like the greater region. So thanks for that and inviting me to be a part of it.
Oh, you're welcome. It's funny, a lot of this back end stuff that I've learned with podcasting and streaming comes from a deep dive that I don't even know if you know that I took over COVID. I used to have a live stream of my beehives, and you could sit and watch the bees come and go live on Twitch, and it was pretty fun. It was kind of a cool thing to do, especially because so many people were working from home, and it was a great way to kind of feel like you were outside because you could hear the audio of the bees coming and going. It was pretty popular. I had a couple hundred people would check it out on a regular basis, which is impressive for something. It's just like a static camera of bees coming and going, kind of leveraging all that stuff and finding another use for it. But yeah, thanks for joining me today. I know that when we talked about this a couple of days ago over beers, I told you that we were going to watch the mayor of Trenton try to convince city council to regionalize. And I remember distinctly the look on your face was like, what? That doesn't sound right. But no, in reality, at the January 28th, 2025 council meeting, Mayor Reed Gusciora made a pitch to city council to regionalize the water system, and we'll watch it. I mean, I'm not being hyperbolic here or trying to generalize. We're going to watch clips of it, and we'll certainly include a link in the show notes to the entirety of the video, and I encourage people to watch it. It's not very long. It's worth looking at in its full playthrough, but it's pretty concise, right? It's not like a super long presentation that goes into a tremendous amount of detail. So we'll pause it at a couple of points, and basically what I'm going to do is just kind of share some underpinnings and some rationale that backs up a lot of the things that the mayor's saying about why regionalization makes so much sense. And to do that, we'll refer back to a lot of the DEP reports that DEP commissioned over the course of the last couple of years. And that's probably a good place to start because this meeting falls on January 28th, 2025. And just a few days earlier, DEP had issued the first two reports on the Trenton Water Works. It was the 360 review and the TMF report, technical, managerial, and financial report on the waterworks. A lot happened in the run-up to this meeting. This is just a few days. The water filtration plant shut down because of fries ice. That was the first shutdown of 2025. And that was major news. That was like a really big deal. But that wasn't it. I mean, I put together a little timeline. In the run-up to this, there was a letter that the DEP wrote to the city in March of 2024 that said there's major structural damage at the Trenton water filtration plant. In July 14th of 2024, two of the water pumps clogged simultaneously, feeding the water filtration plant, and the plant had to shut down. There's stories on this on the Substack, and it was a huge issue. I mean, they considered it a critical failure of the infrastructure. Also during this time, in October 16th, raw water intake pump 3 failed. Is the only operating pump at the time, forced the entire filtration plant to shut down again. So July shut down, October shut down. They tried to use turn on water pump number 3, and it repeatedly failed even after new drives were installed. December of 2024, DEP writes them. It says all 3 pumps are in poor critical condition. So that's just like a month, or just barely 6 weeks before this presentation. And then the huge one, November 2024, the story breaks that, or at least the first letter gets written by DEP to summarize the Cesar Lugo failures, right? The idea that Cesar Lugo was falsifying water testing reports. And if any of these stories are news to you, go back to the Substack, do a little search in the Substack for any of these topics. I'll do my best to throw a bunch of them into the show notes for anybody that these stories are new to. But that was massive. That's November 2024. And then December of 2024, a month later, that's when the story really breaks. That's when it gets a lot of attention. New Jersey Spotlight News interviews the mayor. That letter of December 2024 also issues a 200, I might be off by a little bit, but about $235,000 fine to the water department for this problem with the Cesar Lugo. They basically determined that over a 13-month period, 76% of the water tests that were collected were falsified. So again, this is a month earlier now before this presentation. So I think that helps kind of put things into context with the tone and the sort of the position that the mayor might have been in at the time, because I think it's obvious that his position has changed substantially since this January 28th, 25 presentation. And we'll go over some of that towards the end. I've got a few clips to share on that topic. And again, just 2 weeks before this, frazzle ice clogs the intakes, plant shut down, water conservation notices issued. 200,000 customers are affected by the water plant shutdown. And it didn't seem as though we had a real clear solution to how that was going to resolve itself. It seemed, at the time, really scary, and still pretty scary. I mean, we had a fast forward to December of 2025, we had another plant shutdown that was first reported on my Substack. I say all this just because I feel as though when I watched this back the other day in preparation for this, it got me thinking, like, how do you go from a position of trying to convince city council to regionalize the water system to literally almost vilifying anybody that even brings up the concept? And we'll go into some of that at the end. I don't know. What are your thoughts on this, Jacque? You've been following this along pretty closely. You see this as maybe there was a pivot in who the mayor was talking to and how this change of heart happened, or do you think this might have been just like a slow grind where?
Well, I'm going to go back a little bit further. And I want to say this, that it has nothing to do with my personal opinions about any of the people. I spend time with, many of the elected officials and leaders and directors and so forth here in the city of Trenton and in other municipalities as well. So when I talk about my experiences and thoughts, it's from a perspective of not attacking them as human beings. That's not what this is about.
Oh, sorry about
That's fine. It's more along the lines of, we as the community, me personally, my family, my loved ones, we have taken the step to put our trust, our support, and our faith in our elected officials, all of them, to do what they say and to what is the best interest of those who they represent. And the more I look at some of these issues around the water, I find that it's missing where our leadership is. And I know that we have issues within the city with infrastructure, like many post-industrial cities, just like Trenton. And it has been a talking point for a very long time for many administrations about the importance of our infrastructure and the need to pivot and jobs and the economy and all those things around the infrastructure. But when given the opportunity, I have failed to see where that's actually taking place here in Trenton. And one of our most important infrastructure things is the quality of our water. And over the years, I've heard many different folks talk about things from different perspectives. And as not only a resident, but a business owner and a family that's here, I just want some clarity. some honesty, some truth. I want to go with facts. I don't want to hear that a state agency or a regional agency doesn't align with our municipal government. To me, those things don't make sense. And then we get into the space where it's backbiting and fighting and just comments on social media, but we never get to the core point of what are the facts? What is the quality of the water? What is happening at the water department? And I'm looking forward to us going through and having some commentary of what the mayor, Reed Gusciora, said more than a year ago
Yeah.
to what has changed and factoring that through the different things that we're hearing from people who were previously in the administration, the silence from some of the folks who are in the administration now. It really, as some folks say in politics, it stinks at the head. So it's going to stink all the way through the tail as well. And as residents, I just want to know, where are we going? What is the direction? What are the facts? And who's held responsible? It's pretty simple.
Yeah, I'm gonna just, as a spoiler alert, is like I wish, I don't think we have all this. I don't think I'm gonna be able to answer all those questions. I mean, I can't collect enough information to make all that, to square all that. But we can certainly share, what's being put out there, and just kind of talk about it and see if we can figure some of it out. But you are going to see, well, we're going to jump into it in a second, but you're going to see a 180-degree turn on, not only just on his overall position, but in the rationale. I mean, I have no answers for how you can make such a pivot. We'll see. Let's get started. So yeah, to set the stage, this was, first of all, shout out to Collaboration Trenton for keeping an archive of all these videos. I've clipped it down for the video version of our podcast and cropped it down just to the dais and the podium of with the mayor speaking. But the full video is available, as I mentioned before. Oh, it's also important to mention one other thing. There was the day before this meeting, the mayor signed a letter, and let's jump over to that. I pulled this off. This lives on the Hamilton mayor's website right now, and it's a joint. As I said, it's a joint letter. It was issued literally the day before the meeting on the 28th. So this was issued on the 27th, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it talks about the commissioner issuing these reports. And the bolded statements are a really strong one. It says, "We, the mayors of the Trenton Water Works service towns, agree that the status quo is not sustainable, and we believe that creating a new public utility with governance that allows for greater operational independence and collaboration across municipalities is a necessary step forward." And if we go all the way down, this was the printed version of this was from all the mayors of the service area, including our mayor, the Trenton mayor. I encourage people to go back and read this and just sort of refamiliarize yourself with this position. Again, it'll be in the show notes. Let's jump over to the beginning of his remarks. We're going to pause it a few times and stop and talk about some of these things. So.
One of the benefits of moving towards a regional utility is that the resources and the financial power can come from 5 service municipalities and not just one of Trenton. We need bonding capacity to do over $600 million in capital improvements over the next 10 years. We can do it alone if that's council's prerogative, or we can get a shared responsibility among the other municipalities. I personally think that that's a way to go. We'll still keep the T in Trenton Water Works. We'll still protect our employees. They'll have civil service protection, but we'll be able to have the other municipalities have a seat at the table. Right now, 55% of the customers of Trenton Water Works reside outside of Trenton. So they have demanded a better say in our operations. And I think that's reasonable exchange for having their muscle weight.
He's made it clear it's his personal preference at least at that time that we go with some sort of, he didn't say, did he use the word regionalization?
Yes, he did.
Yeah. And yeah, so he's basically saying rationale, I think, is right out of the, at least in this first clip, is about bonding capacity, about financial capacity. And that number that he presented, 650 million, it's or 600 million, I think he said, but it's still pretty accurate, at least according to the latest numbers that have, been updated a year later. I think they're up to maybe 650 now, 700 tops. But he's basically saying that the status quo, the city's ownership of the water utility does not give it the financial capacity to, finance generate all these bonds, and address all these needs. So I went through TMF reports and pulled out a couple little things that are worth sharing. Yeah, so the very first thing he's saying is well supported in the 360 review, and this is a document that was done by Black and Veatch. They are arguably one of the most prominent firms consulting firms on water infrastructure, arguably in the world. I mean, they do all over the world. And I got a quote from the report that sort of backs this up. So it says, TWW does not have the financial capacity to meet a 10-year, $570 million inflation-adjusted capital improvement plan. Hard stop. It also talks in terms about the 55% of the revenue is generated from outside the city. Good suburban growth has resulted in TWW's suburban customer now accounting for 56% of revenue. And the customers are now predominantly suburban. The governance and cost sharing structure just hasn't caught up to reality.
Mark, I want to jump in there, and this has always been my sticking point. When a potential elected official or a candidate speaks and says these different things about what they're going to do or what they're not going to do or how they're going to behave and why they are different than previous people, I tend to say, okay, I take them at, face value of what they're saying. But at the same time, if we listen to the words that they're saying with an understanding of what can be done or what the position entails or what the authority is, the authoritative structure, all those different things. Unfortunately, I feel as though this current administration has not presented any plans for anything such as this magnitude. And even when the water, we knew it was an issue and a problem for a very, very long time. I would think that any administration that comes in should have been aware of the most important resource or the status of it. But we had documentation from things in the past, the previous couple of administrations who utilized the water utility as a way to get people jobs, and we knew there was investigations going on. There was all this trouble, and when a leader comes in, I would think the leader would easily know, okay, these are the areas I need to be concerned with. These are areas I need to fix ASAP. And I don't know what has happened that the leadership didn't have a plan one coming in, because it's obvious. If they had a plan, they would have been doing this going on. It was definitely a sense of patching by how people were moved around and, who's doing what at the city level from the water department.
Yeah.
And to this point, we've got documentation from a council meeting where making a presentation saying, I think we ought to go in this direction. Obviously, they talked to some of the other municipalities, and they were all on board. They put together a letter. They said, this is what we're doing. Well, what happened in that short amount of time for a 180-degree turn, and for there to be no communication as to why you've changed your mind? What new information has come up? What have you learned that all of a sudden you're doing a 180-degree turn from regionalization of the water authority with multiple municipalities to now you want nothing to do with it?
Yeah,
I also,
that's a great point.
and I just want to say this
Please.
final point is that it stinks because this is also an election year. So you start wondering, all right, is this something that's going to be, someone said, no, we're going to push this off until you get in there again, and we'll use this as, motivating space for the next 4 years for you? Because if that's the kind of thing that we're going through with this administration or any other administration with the current state of our city, then they might not be the right people. And if so, they're not leading for the majority of the people who are here.
Yeah, your comment made me reminded me that the date that he gave this is the start of year 7 of his administration. And if you rewind all the way back to his first campaign, Trenton Water Works was like top of the list. It was he had press releases about a Trenton Water Works advisory board or advisory council, I think, that he was talking about, setting up, and as best I could tell, no one was ever appointed to that board. It never met. Nothing ever really came of it. There was certainly an attempt there, and I think when the mayor came in, he made some really strong moves right out of the gate. I mean, he appointed Shin Fei, the former West Windsor mayor, who had a career in water infrastructure, appointed him to head up the water department. Clearly the intention was there early on, but I think it's also, I find myself being a little bit easy on the mayor here. It's a very difficult problem. It is, and then at the same time, he had a hostile city council, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's one of those things that gets a lot of attention because it's a differentiator, and it's something that everybody can sort of can relate to. My tap water, I want to make sure my water is safe. It's great fodder for and great topic for a campaign, and something to point fingers at if you're running against this administration. So yeah, I can certainly see how it's gonna become more of a tug of war, and that's kind of what got me back to thinking about doing this podcast and focusing on this. Is just like let's unpack the full record on this, and the full record doesn't actually go back 7 years. This huge change in position was only 14 months ago or 15 months ago, right? I think about this time as being so long ago just because of so much has transpired with the water department, but this is literally just last January, the prior January 2025. But yeah, let's keep going. We've got a few more things I want to cover. So next clip up.
Right now, we do have great support from the legislators in the 15th legislative district. If the governance includes Hamilton, that will bring in the 14th legislative district. So we'll have 2 legislative districts fighting for us in Trenton for the resources we need. If we do nothing, we have to go it alone. We have to make these upgrades ourselves. We have made substantial progress, but there's so much more that we have to do.
All right, I'm going to pause it there. I feel like he misspoke. I feel like he might have had like a good idea for this portion of his presentation, but to say that those legislators don't represent those customers because regionalization hasn't happened, I don't know. What's your take on it?
The first thing is political talk. I think most people don't even know what legislative district they're in.
Yeah, well said. We just had this conversation the other night. I was asking
You
you
know what I
about our
mean?
district.
I don't think most people even have an idea. Like, I mean, you can ask people in Trenton what ward they live in or who their council person is. And sometimes they're like, I don't know. And these are people who are, rather engaged. So when I hear that, it sounds to me like it was very much just like political legal speak, just to kind of throw a term out to say that, we've got this wide net and we're working in conjunction with all of them. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I just,
Uh,
if you're like Wayne D'Angelo, for instance, and you're listening to that, you're probably pissed. You're probably like, what the hell is he talking about? Like somehow I'm gonna pay attention more because it's and advocate more for my constituents in Hamilton Township because the water system is regionalized now. And then he says at the end, he's like, if we don't do this, we have to go it alone, as if like we have to like go to the legislature and without representation and advocate for whatever the needs are, whether it's policy or regs or financing or whatever.
well,
I feel like this one like landed with a thud. I don't know.
yeah, we say like a lead balloon. And with that, the communication oftentimes doesn't sound like he's in it with the people. It's almost like the handful of leaders that they're working with and they want to work with, and then everyone else.
Mm.
Like I haven't heard him say anything about like the customers or, about all of the residents or about all of the businesses that are utilizing this public utility and giving it out.
Yeah.
And again, if you're looking for support, where do you normally go in politics? You go for the unions, you go for the business, maybe it's education, the trade, or whatever. Who is this to?
Yeah. I think we forget sometimes too that there's businesses in our service area that are based on water. Like
Yes.
100%. Like I think our biggest water customer is the biotech firm off of Bear Tavern Road. They use more water, I think, than anybody by far. And then of course there's River Horse, who's making beer with our water. And I think a lot of times when you hear somebody say, "Oh, the businesses rely on this," you think, "Oh, they're gonna to like wash their hands and stuff." No, there's actually like water-based businesses in our service area that are extremely reliant on it. I mean, I'm sure the pork roll factories uses a tremendous amount of it. It's a differentiator if you're shopping for a new office space or a new place to land like a bakery, for instance. If you're thinking about bringing a bakery to a city, it's one of the things you want to make sure is good is the water. But yeah, I think you're right. There's a lack of context from the perspective of the customer. Let's talk about this next one.
We've worked hand in hand with DEP. They're helping us bring in middle management. That was another problem, is the ability to recruit and pay middle managers. We've not been able to do that with the resources we have, but with moving towards a regional utility, that will go a long way with helping us get the resources and get the talent to run the water system.
All right. Now we're talking about, we first introduced the topic of working hand in hand with DEP. He introduces the idea that DEP has some solution to bring in middle management, which, as far as I know, has never materialized. I remember there being an RFP around this era that DEP had issued to try to hire a consulting company, like an engineering company, to bring a bunch of staff into the building and be like kind of working day to day, because DEP's, as much as DEP was providing oversight, they're not rolling up their sleeves and like filling actual job functions. They're more there on an advisory role and in the best of scenarios. So what he might have been referring to is this attempt that DEP had made to bring in these middle managers and these professionals to just sort of supplement existing staff, and it never materialized. If my memory is correct, they got no responses to that RFP. In fact, the Waterworks took this concept and internalized it. And they've issued multiple RFPs. I think the very first one was in September or late August. It was right after they started doing the H2 Open events. They issued an RFP to hire about 20 or so professionals that filled in all various functions in the organizational chart at the water filtration plant and at the customer service center on Cortlandt Street, and all these various positions. And they've issued and reissued that RFP no less than 5 times. In fact, they just accepted bids again, I think, in January for yet another attempt to follow this process. And it's like worth unpacking that for a minute too, because in a couple of comments ago, we heard him say, we're civil services going to be, if we go regionalization, civil services there, we're going to protect our employees. Yet at the same time, one of the solutions that they're talking about is this complete end around of the civil service process and hiring a company to bring in professionals that, I'm going to guess that none of those people that they're going to bring in are from the city of Trenton.
Mhm. I want to add a couple of things with this and tie it back to my original point was, where's the plan? If you're going into a position, you're the top elected official, like this is your city. You would think that you have an understanding of the department needs and what the talents are before you go in. Because I would assume that your team, you got to know, hey, if we start firing everybody, we're not going to have anybody to do the work. So there has to be some sort of a succession plan, a transition plan, et cetera. And I think that speaks to leadership. Because if you're coming in knowing that, hey, we're going to take over, our administration, if we win, we're going to now have these areas of concern that are public. Everyone already knows these are things that are going on and taking place. What is going to be our plan for that? And if there isn't one, then I kind of feel shame on us as residents for who we've elected who didn't have a plan, who didn't have a secondary idea or a tertiary idea when they realize, hey, this is really what's going on inside the house. And then to go out in public and, from my opinion, avoid talking about it until it becomes an issue, at the state level or the federal level. So now it's okay, let's swarm and put out this fire. Well, this is a long sustaining fire. We can't put it out. Okay, so what are we going to do? Okay, well, let's just turn it over to someone who may not be qualified to speak on these things. And that makes the fire spread or goes worse. And we still don't have any of the information. And I'm sorry that I have to say this, but way too often people utilize sexism, racism, classism, or anything as a way to defer from having a conversation about whose responsibility it is. If you ask a question and the next thing out of the person's mouth accuses someone of being racist or being sexist or something else just because they're asking a question, that's a strategy. And we've got to learn that strategy is beyond being helpful to anyone. And let me just say this final point for folks who may want to come at you or come at me. I'm not saying that sexism and classism and ageism don't happen. They absolutely happen. But I know that there are people who use that as a tool for them to take advantage of situations, for them to bully or flex themselves. And this is in all segments of our society. So it doesn't strike me that this may be taking place at the highest levels of government, where someone may say, hey, look, I'm not going to do anything because I don't have to, or I don't want to, because of arrogance. But the people who are going to suffer are always going to be the majority. And the equality talk is very important to me. So what's good for someone who's got everything should be good for someone who technically doesn't have it at all, especially if we're supposed to be such a badass country.
Wow. A little footnote to that comment is that the people that give me the greatest hope and confidence at the water filtration plant are women of color. There's two women there in particular that I've sort of been following pretty closely in, communications and, presentations that have been given, that are just, they're, I know they're doing their job, and I know they're doing it well, and they don't need to be working at the City of Trenton's water filtration plant. They would be hired away in a second if they were not committed to these customers and these jobs. And I was fortunate enough to have a conversation with Miss Brooks recently. She called me because I'm Daisha Brooks is a head chemist. I think she's the head chemist. She's also has a operator's license for the water filtration plant, so she's very well credentialed. She called me about my water test I'm one of the lead water tests. I got a chance to chat with her for a few minutes, and I was like, look, I'm not going to let this opportunity slide by without, trying to, talk to you a little bit about your experience at the water plant. And I asked her straight up, I'm like, what keeps you there? Why? I said something to the effect of, like, you could be hired, you could take a job in a second anywhere else and do far better and have far less requirements on overtime, standby time, and all these things that, like, force your life to be revolve around that water plant. And she just gave me the most heartwarming response about being committed to the residents and the job, and how appreciative she was at the time when she first started working there to have a position a position with good benefits. That was, like, super important to her. And she's sort of keeps that, in her eye when she's going to work, I guess, and waking up in the middle of the night because she's on call for any random thing that happens at the plant. But I think going back to this middle management idea, this is something that's, like, bubbled up a bunch of times. I gave some, I think it was last fall, I got up at City Council that same day I was right there, and suggested that City Council spend a lot more time at trying to improve the hiring situation, not only trying to improve our wages that we're paying these people. At the time I was looking at some reports that said that a new hire, a credentialed new hire, like into a technical position, had a salary of $47,000. I think it's bumped up a little bit with some changes in the contracts, but $47,000 a starting position for somebody that with a credential, or like a chemistry background or biology background. I forget what the requirements were. And at that time, the longest tenure of any of the engineers in the water plant was 4 years. The longest tenure, not the average, but the longest tenure of an engineer. And if you had gone back 5 years, that average probably would have been triple that. It would have been 15 years easily. I've talked to people that were at the water plant for 30, 35 years, found their way, pushed out the door in this administration, for reasons I don't quite understand, or were not shared with me. But there was a huge attrition of experienced people in this administration, and it created a lot of these vacancies that.
Can I just add something to the vacancies? Because I also want to talk about a strategy that has been said and used for many years in administrations here in Trenton, is the fact that they can't hire anyone. And when they say those terms, they make it sound like there's a set number of people that work for the city, and that's it. And that there's no one else getting jobs, there's no one else doing consulting work. It's just this finite number of people. And the only reason why it's like that is because of the bad people over at the state level who won't allow us to hire anybody. And I'm wondering how accurate that is when we really talk about, who's getting hired, if jobs are being created and positions are being filled, or is the city really handcuffed into this position that they have to do what they can with what they have, because the state oversight is preventing them from hiring the proper people, paying people the proper salaries in competition with other places. Can you just speak to that, just from your perspective and any of the research that you've done?
Yeah, certainly. There's a couple things come to mind when you say that. And I think I've heard the mayor say this recently, and I think there's a lot of truth to it, and that is the Christie administration was attempting to basically allow the water department to die on the vine. So they had an MOU with the Department of Community Affairs in the state of New Jersey, had an MOU with the city of Trenton that basically gave them veto rights for virtually everything that was going on in city government. Every resolution or ordinance had to be approved by them, and I think it still does. I think we're still operating under some level of that same MOU. But I think one of the comments that the mayor's going to make shortly is going to talk about the idea that the Christie administration they were just completely denying every request that came forward to invest back in the water system. And this obviously predates Reed's time at the city, but it's still worth remembering that was a really rough patch for the water department. But getting back to the idea of the staff and the kind of the pipeline of people, you do hear that. You do hear people sort of talk about it as this like finite pool. But one of the things that the city did a few years ago, and this was I believe it was in Reed's administration, is that they worked with Mercer County Community College to set up a program to train people. Yeah. And I remember there was like a press release with like all these smiling faces of people holding up their little certificates. I don't know if they were like necessarily translated into like water certificates where they could like, take that certificate and be a licensed operator of a distribution or a water filtration plant. But they were, there was this like training, system that was in place, and it was really meant to incentivize existing employees to move forward. But and not only existing employees, like, so if you're a maintenance person and you're just like pushing a broom or painting stuff, and now you've got this opportunity in front of you to elevate yourself up on the organizational chart with like greater responsibility and greater pay. But I think the feedback that I've gotten from people in the water department was that the lack of middle management and the lack of like support in that organizational chart made everyone really reluctant to invest that time. And like, they didn't really see the payoff. They're like, okay, well, I could move up, but there's no supervisor for that position that you're talking about. And I'm, and I could be at risk if I'm, or it may not be worth the time and energy to elevate myself to that level, only to be in a position that I'm not going to enjoy, or it's not going to be worth the extra little bit of money that they're dangling in front of me for all the hours that I may need to. But that program seems like it was one and done, that training program. I remember seeing the press release. I remember seeing the smiling photos. I think I did an article about it, or at least I started an article about it. I don't know if I ever finished it. But this topic of middle management is really important. And there's a bunch of posts on the Substack about this, but I think one of the posts that I did that kind of summed it all up was where I took all of the problems in the water filtration plant and the water system that had been identified in all these different reports that DEP had issued. And I found that almost all of them had commonality with staffing. The Venn diagram of all these things, staffing was the one commonality. It was, the idea that we didn't have people that could write specifications for projects to actually spend down bond funding. The idea that we didn't have people training lower level staff to do preventative maintenance to make sure that, to improve the reliability of things. There's a long list of these things, and I encourage people to go back and read it. I'll try to drop it in the show notes. But staffing is, I would argue, the number one issue that if you can solve that issue, you can put Trenton Water Works on good footing and have a very predictable future. Because even today, as of right now, there's an RFP on the city's website to write specification, to hire a company to write specifications to do a project. And so we just do not have the capacity within the water department to design these projects, get them on the street, and then do the oversight that's necessary as the projects are undertaken. We're farming out like literally everything. As I mentioned earlier, we're trying to farm out portions of the organizational chart. People that show up and punch the clock every day, we're trying to hire them through like a temp agency, if you will, engineering temp agency. There's an RFP on the street right now to hire a crew to clean the Cortlandt Street office. Like, we're not even hiring for basic positions anymore. You know, we're like outsourcing everything. That those cost, you know, the cost of all that is you know, certainly much more expensive than you know, us bringing those people on and having them as paid employees. And I also wonder, like, could you imagine being somebody in the lab, for instance, and then having, you know, that works on the payroll, you know, you're on payroll with the city, and then, you know, they hire this temp agency to bring in people to supplement the staff. I guarantee you those people are going to be making double what the waterworks people are going to be making, you know, the people that are employed by the waterworks. And can you imagine what it must be like to, or what it will be like if they actually are successful, is to, like, you know, have like a working relationship with someone who's did not have to meet the residency requirement, can, you know, basically doesn't respond to the same supervisor that you respond to, and is probably making a boatload more than you're making. I think it's going to be, it's a challenging situation for sure. But
And Mark, I just want to add this comment to that,
Mm.
especially the way you laid out your statement. If we don't have a plan going into things and we're not really going by a calendar, what's our succession plan for when people start leaving or retiring or, you know, transition out, whatever it is? What is our succession plan? If this is such an important utility, such a money maker, or the biggest asset, wouldn't it behoove us to make sure that it was, one, treated with respect, it was presented in a way where it was functioning at maximum capacity, in the most efficient way? And did you not know 6, 7, 8 years ago? Did your folks who were there, the people you kept on staff, did anyone tell you, hey, look, we got a huge, huge problem right here, and we need to take care of this? Or as a leader, did you just ignore it or move on from it because you had, you know, bigger fish to fry, so to speak? Because you can't say you didn't know when it's been out in the public for decades about the potential of selling, potential regionalization, former elected officials involved with the deal, not with the deal. Um, Now all of a sudden it's back again,
yeah,
and no one knows, no one's got a plan.
this is a great segue to the next comments from the mayor. Let's
Yeah.
listen.
We don't want to privatize. We don't want to sell to a private company. But we recognize that if we do nothing, it's all the burdens are on our shoulder to make the improvements.
Yeah. So, you know, he mentions, you know, we don't want to privatize, we don't want to sell to a private company, but we recognize that if we do nothing, I think what he was trying to imply was, if we do nothing, the most likely outcome is that we are going to be taken over by there's going to be some intervention that is going to pull the waterworks out of our hands and put it in the hands of a private company. I feel like that's like the subtext that he didn't say, but instead he says all the burden falls on our shoulders to make the improvements. Right. So let's go back over. It says we don't want to sell to a private company, but we recognize that if we do nothing, all the burden falls on our shoulders to make the improvements. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. We've got a few more things I want to cover before we wrap up.
We have a 50-year-old filtration plant that is becoming obsolete as we continue. So again, we can either go it alone, or we can bring in the other municipalities and help us get the resources to pay for all the upgrades that we need to keep the T in Trenton Water Works.
He's like losing steam, right? And like his deliveries, because you know what's coming. He's going to say, does anyone have any questions? Yeah, it's a funny thing about that. The reason I wanted to highlight that is that the 50-year-old water filtration plant is not part of any of this like $700 million of capital improvements projects. It's a problem that does not have a budget for it yet. And in fact, there's like, I've read some things that say that that the way it's designed, and this is, you could actually say the same thing about the central pumping station. The way it's designed is it's almost impossible to upgrade it substantially. That that it almost becomes cost beneficial to tear it down, to build a temporary filtration plant, tear it down, build a new fully modern one, and then remove the temporary one. And can you imagine the cost of, like, I mean,
But Mark, let me just jump in here, right, and say this, and this is where it drives me crazy with a lot of elected officials. They'll point to a 40, 50-year-old problem that they obviously have known about. They've got the data, they've got all the information on it. But then when someone says, okay, well, the best thing for us to do is to maybe an alternative. We build a temporary one, we knock it down, we build something with a grassroots types of funding and information where for future generations, we know that this elected official put a stake in the ground and said, for the next 100 years, we're going to make sure that we have the best water. Everybody, this is the direction that we're going. We're putting everything that we have behind it. Martin Luther King style. I might not see the mountaintop, but I know that when I'm gone, this water plant is going to be around for another 100 years, and it's going to be helping to stabilize the region, provide water resources, new jobs, etc. But instead of them doing that, oh, woe is me. I got to put my hat in my hand and come help me.
Yep.
Give me some money. And if we don't do it, oh no.
Yeah.
The
He said
boogeyman's going to come and take everything from us. And it's not going to be my fault. It's going to be everybody else's fault. When we could just say, hey, look, let's just be that badass and say, okay, look, what's the option? Can we build a new one? Can we think about a different type of an infrastructure? What happened to all that Biden money? Oh, let me stop.
Yeah, it's funny that he says the plant is 50 years old. It was a young 43 when he started. All right, we're gonna jump ahead in the video a little bit.
One example of the shortcomings was our billing and our customer service. One of the things that the problem we have is that since COVID, we had a moratorium on collections. So for over 3 years, we haven't been able to collect. A lot of people said, well, since there's a moratorium, I don't have to pay my water bill. So that has been, and that is done by the state. And when the moratorium was lifted, it was then subsequently put back down. There is right now a moratorium. We can't have shut-offs, and until that, we can't collect.
Yeah, so he's basically talking about the cash flow of the water department here, and there's so much more to this. I mean, I did some stories, some Substack posts about this, about the idea that we're not realizing the total revenue that we should be on for the water department, that there's still to this day a huge number of businesses and residents and customers that are getting estimated water bills that are far below the amount of water that they should be paying. I'm doing some research now on that a little bit more. Hope to have something in the next month or so on that, because it's really time consuming. But there's revenue. He's talking about the idea that, like, the state didn't allow us to collect, but the bigger problem is that we're not putting bills out for the revenue that we could be collecting, and to a sizable amount. We did a water increase, I think it was in 2009, a water rate increase in 2009, and we never got even close to the revenue that they were projecting when they pitched that. I found the slide deck from 2009 where they said this water increase is going to turn into, I think it was $9 million. And there's a Substack post on this I'll throw in the comments. It's going to be $9 million, but we're going to, I think they only got 50% of that in additional revenue. So there's major problems with billing and the billing system itself. I want to jump forward to,
while you're jumping to do that, Mark,
yeah.
I just want to add this other piece to that. I think that this ties into the fact that as a city, we don't know what properties we have, what properties are online, who owns these properties. Um, when they send some information out, you would think instead of sending blanket information out, they would be a bit more specific. You know, like they'll send out mailers for everything, and not knowing that, hey, you know, maybe we already updated the water meter on this house. Why are we, if we know it's got an updated water meter, then why are we sending all this marketing about, hey, you need to update your water meter? It's almost like a waste of money. And to me, that means there's no data being collected that, hey, this strip of houses all had the water meter replaced and it's functioning properly. Um,
They're having a really
and
hard
again, to
time
me, just,
doing
yeah,
that.
it just speaks to like inconsistencies, no plan, no structure, and no vision, in
Yeah.
my opinion.
Yeah, there's a grant. I don't know a lot of the specifics about it. I haven't dug into it, but Frank Cusack was telling me about this grant that the water department has, to put in these like e-meters, and they're having a ton of problems with people trusting the person knocking on the door to come in their house and do the work. And I can't even begin to try to unpack that and really understand that well, but it seems like it's a barrier to getting to the point where we're doing better billing, right? It's these like little, and it's like a social thing too. It's not, you know,
Yeah.
it's not a nuts and bolts thing. It's a trust issue. It's a messaging issue. It's a larger community issue in some cases. Yeah, it could even like trickle into mental health and other things that our water staff are not really set up to, to even recognize or accommodate. So
Mhm.
there's a lot to this issue of accurate billing. And then this also reminds me of like the story from this past December, in November and December, when people who had been in their homes for 25 years and paid their water bill religiously get a notice in their mailbox that they're about to have a water lien sold and that will be recorded against their property. And if this story is news to you, please go back and check that out. That one's definitely going in the show notes. I think that was the first post I ever did to get 1,500 views in 24 hours. And it was wildly popular story. And it got picked up by a lot of other news outlets too. So please go check that out. That was it was only the city residents that were subject to that mess, and it was a super tight time frame. It was like, hey, you're getting this letter. We're going to sell you a lien on your property, and guess what? You can't pay it online. You have to go into City Hall and pay this in person in order to avoid having this lien recorded against your property. And the stories that I heard about people in City Hall in the process that it took to get people's water bills paid was wild. It was like, you had to stand in multiple lines. You had to go in one line to do something to like verify who you were, and then another line to actually pay the bill. And there was only certain ways in which you could pay the bill. From what I understand, it was an absolute nightmare. So they set themselves up for this. It was just like, it's a messaging, it's a billing, it's a processing issue that, that you should not be getting a bill for a water arrearages for the person that owned your property before you did 25 years ago in cases of, at least in the story that I detailed in Substack. It was a very long time that this person owned this unit, and there's no detail in the invoice at all. The invoice just says amount owed and doesn't say anything about like, oh, this is an arrearage from another owner or any background whatsoever. So a lot of people just saw it and were like, this has got to be wrong. I've paid every bill I've ever gotten from the water department. There's and so I think it got dismissed, and luckily, a lot of people were able to solve the problem, but there's hundreds of liens against people's properties in the city of Trenton because of these bills, these like ghost bills that just showed up in their mailbox.
And kudos to you for putting together and whoever you worked with to get all the information and the data on the Substack, the Mains of Trenton, so that folks could look on a map. And although they couldn't get all the information, it was definitely a step forward for them. And I'm sure there were some folks who took advantage of that and then were able to go down to city, the water department, the water utility, and find out exactly what was going on. And hopefully those folks did not, put themselves in a legal space where they've lost their homes or something in that regards.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. That was a big project, and yeah, I wish I could say I had a team of people working on it, but I did not. It was I stayed up real late one night getting that database set up. It was not easy because the city did not want to make it easy on you. The only thing that they offered after you got the notice, um, the only thing that was on the city's website was a block and lot listing of
Yeah.
the arrearages. And unless you happen to know, do you know your block and lot? I don't.
Nope.
Yeah.
Nope.
Do you even know how to look it up?
Nope.
Yeah. I mean, now that I think about it for a second, I would look at my tax bill. It's certainly going to have it on there, but I doubt it's on it might not be on my water bill on the prior
Yeah,
water
I
bill.
don't think it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I want to jump forward to the first comment that's worth covering. Yeah, Jen Williams had a comment that, and she makes this comment regularly, so but I think this is the first time she actually made it. Let's listen.
Reading through this, there were some things I found concerning. In the statement that was issued by yourself and the other mayors, it says this entity must be separate and independent from Trenton municipal government, hence able to access special financing, advance capital work, and be operationally efficient, attract additional talent, and remain free from political interference. What does the phrasing "and remain free from political interference" actually mean?
Well, we had,
So,
when this is
let's
no
play that
reflection
comment.
on this current council, you are all rational actors. We had a previous council who just said no to a lot of upgrades. We probably wouldn't be here if it wasn't for council's interference. We brought on Steve Pico, a former assistant commissioner of DEP, to be our director to finally bring that professionalism. After 90 days, they would not allow him to continue. And it's things like that, system upgrades that were delayed because of the previous council. So there is a benefit to having a utility that I can't control, that you can't control, but that will operate independently. It's not the best. Just look at Trenton Parking Authority.
Oh gosh, he's like, he started so strong. And then he's like cutting the idea off at its knees, and then the sentence of like, something that you can't control and something that I can't control. It's real bad imagery. But the point is still strong. I mean, because I feel like that that former council was really a big hit on the progress of the water department. In fact, I went back and I looked at the resolutions from that era, and I found 14 resolutions that were rejected by city council that were related to, that had the water works in their title. It's just some things as simple as like copper tubing, the purchase of copper tubing, which, it's like, come on. There's the demolition for the building on Prospect Street across from the reservoir where they're going to build these tanks. That was shot down twice. To hire an engineer to study the water main break and improvements on Olden Avenue. Shout out to all our Ewing friends. Shot down. Security guards. Shot down. And hiring a firm to do security. Engineering services for the intake. A $3 million budget to repair leaks in the water system. Shot down. And that may have paid big dividends this past winter when we were chasing water main breaks and the reservoir was dropping like a rock. So there were 14 that were related to the waterworks. Go ahead.
I do want to touch on a couple of things with this and highlight the point that administration, those people are no longer in the way that he so comfortably blamed on the previous folks. Well, those folks aren't there now. So what is the reason for the holdup? Oh, well, now it's the state. Oh, it's someone else. Well, how about it just being something simple like a plan, a strategy, a structure, good communication, and being honest as to where it is? Because, the couple of images that I saw where they had tarps and things like that in the water supply house, to prevent, water coming through the roof. Like, no one knew that. No one knew that we got to fix the roof. No one knew that, hey, someone could actually have a major problem here. Someone could maybe die.
Yeah, it gets back to that triage approach to dealing with things there. You know, they're just, they throw a tarp on it and you know, move on. And yeah, it's someone saw it, someone sent someone over to Harbor Freight with a coupon to buy a, you know, to buy the tarp, and yeah, and then that was the solution, you know, and then someone else was like, well, you know, someday we'll fix the roof, but for now the tarp's got it. You know, I will say though, that issue has been fixed. They did like sort of, they did hire an emergency contractor to come in and stop the bleeding on the roof, but it's just, it was just a temporary patch. I think the total cost of replacing the roof in that building is millions. I want to say $3 to $5 million, but I don't have the notes in front of me on it.
And so real quick, Mark,
Yeah.
with one other thing with that. So you're a homeowner, like, you know, it didn't happen overnight.
No.
So it's been going on for a long time, and hundreds, if not thousands of people knew about it. And just for whatever reason, they didn't fix it, whether they couldn't, didn't want to, thought it was an issue, they didn't. But now it's a huge problem. A building without the proper maintenance can easily go into disrepair. And then the next thing you know, it's beyond repair. And that might actually be where we are now. And that might actually be the conversation that we should be having. But I think now it's just easier for everyone to point a finger, blame it on someone else, and maybe try to ride this out and say, hey, look, I'm going to be out of Trenton. I'm going to be out of this water area in a couple of years. We'll let someone else deal with it.
Well, let's jump ahead. There's a really good comment here that I want to play, and then Mayor's response.
An accounting of the costs that will be needed to fairly compensate the city of Trenton for its asset. Does that language mean that we will lose control of the Trenton Water Works, or we're being forced to sell it by the state of New Jersey?
Not at all. Keep in mind that there are only 2 municipalities as the 5 that the complete geographical territory is within Trenton Water Works system. That is Ewing and Trenton. One of the models is a weighted model of how many customers you have. Trenton would still be on top of that. So that's one system that I favor. And again, you're also in the driver's seat. You have to approve anything we do as a first initial step. And it's still debatable of what, we're still researching whether this has to be approved by the voters, which I'm fine with. The last time they had a referendum as an elected official, as an assemblyman, I voted no, or I supported the no vote. So I was with you on stopping it. The problem was 14 years ago, we didn't say, okay, let's completely invest in this system. And it is, again, it's not the worst system in the world, as a lot of folks may want to paint it. It still delivers the majority of time it operates. It delivers a water that's within meeting safe water drinking standards. We do have times, as any, you could Google, there's systems across the system, the United States that shut down, that have to deliver bottled water. We have not done that. We know we have our challenges and we're meeting them. But I think that collectively and rationally, we're still digesting the reports. We're still meeting with the service municipalities. We're a long way to go before a proposal is put forth. In fact, I would suggest that council form a subcommittee to also equally weigh in, because ultimately you're the first stop to approve or not. The only thing I caution is that if we do nothing, we have to come up with a plan to get the $600 million to fund all the capital improvements that we need over the next 10 years.
All right, lots to unpack here, but I think the big takeaway for me is, first of all, this weighted approach to the membership of this regional board. He basically spells out something that's really important, that if we were to go in a regionalization approach, there's various models to how the board representation would be done. But the strongest or sort of most simple and equitable approach is to have membership of that board in parity with the customer base of that municipality. And just because 55% of the customers are outside the municipality, we'd still have the majority of board members because we have, we're 45%, we would have 45% represented, on our, on that board. 45% of the membership would be us. Of course, they could all, vote in a block and outvote us. But I've seen some other scenarios where they tinker with that even a little bit further and basically guarantee that the city has membership, has control and a voting majority on that board. And yeah, and then the other big thing that he talks about in that section is that they're not the worst. They're not the worst utility in the world. However, they are the worst in New Jersey. As Commissioner LaTourette said later in August, that they're the only water utility that DEP has signed a consent order with to basically intervene and look over the shoulder and be involved on a day-to-day basis with the operation of the water utility. And yeah, he also said something like that made me cringe a little bit. He said like the majority of the days it's operational or something like that. Or, he used the term majority, like as if we're going to like average out like the idea that our tap works, like, no, all it takes is one instance of the tap not working to be, a failure. Yeah, and he's right though. There are challenges all over the country. There's issues in Corpus Christi, Texas right now with the idea that water system may just completely run out of water. I think in Chester County, Pennsylvania, there's a water issue right now where there's a boil water advisory for water utility in not too far away from us. So it's every water system has its challenges. This is not an easy thing to do. This is not, like making solar energy where you just, set up some equipment and, plug it into the meter. There's so many variables, including people and Mother Nature and things that are happening upriver. This is really, really complex stuff. But I think his comments were supportive of this idea that there's an approach that city council would have to approve and possibly even the voters. There's a model that where all this would work, or where all this would be required to be put in front of the council and they would have an opportunity to weigh in on it. And there's also this idea that this could be vetoed at any time. So, we can study this thing and come up with some plans, but in the end, it is something that our city council and possibly even our voters will have to approve.
To add with that, Mark, I want to say that I hear a lot of political speak in this, wanting to take credit for certain things. We're not that bad. We're not as bad as others. If it could be worse, those types of things. But you've been here, like you've been doing this. It's not like you walked in on day one. And again, when you decided, anyone who decides to run for a public office, I would hope that they do a lot of background research, due diligence, to find out what you're getting yourself into. Who applies for a job with a company without doing some background work, some basic understanding about where they are, where they're going, what's it like to work there? It seems like all those basic common sense things have really been missed. And then we're in a situation like now where this whole administration could be different.
Yeah.
And then what? The next group is going to say, oh, well, that other group of people or that other council person or that other mayor, I'm going to be different. I'm going to knock down 1,200 homes instead of 1,000 or whatever it is. And I think it just frustrates, the general public, because most people are just trying to do their day-to-day lives, take care of what they got to do. We know what the median income is in Trenton, and the stats about people having driver's license and all those different things. It just continues to pile on the average person. And I'm personally interested in having a leader who is willing to speak sensible, have a plan, and say, this is the direction that we're going. It may be difficult. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to tell you the truth and go from there. But as we've gone through in this short amount of time today, We have a total 180-degree change from, a little over a year ago. Now, what happens if things were to have moved in that direction, 8 months ago, if we were already on board with this and now the leadership is wavering? Like, maybe we shouldn't do this. Maybe we ought to change.
Yeah. All right, let's get back into it.
Mike, I guess my question, and I just want as much clarity as possible on this, because obviously there's intricate interdepartmental issues with Trenton Water Works, that just saying all these other municipalities coming to the table and having a say or oversight is not necessarily going to fix anything if we're not fixing the problem within Trenton Water Works. Why we have these issues, why we continue to have these issues. We have inner bickering, we have financial concerns, we have management issues, we have procedural issues, you name it. What is this board going to do about that? Like, what is their say-so in this? And what will be their financial contribution to this? Again, $450,000 is being most likely approved by this council tonight going to Trenton Water Works, and that doesn't even count what we have approved in the last 2 years alone. So what can we look forward to for the city of Trenton, and what are we giving up in our rights to Trenton Water Works by doing this?
That's an excellent question. And I would urge us to continue to spend whatever it needs to make those improvements, because what a deal killer is that any new entity that takes over the governance has to absorb the debt. So we don't want Trenton taxpayers hurt anymore necessarily, but if we move to a regional utility, then the debt should be shared among the municipalities. So that is why that's the one benefit.
I want to stop here for a second, because this is something that he turns around and tries to make a point in his current assessment of the situation, and makes it sound like that the efforts to regionalize the water utility are going to take the water utility away and not compensate. But here it's a prerequisite, right? He mentions it as like, oh, in order to do this, this has to happen. But in the messaging that we're going to listen to in a couple of minutes, he makes it sound like we're being robbed and that there's no money that's intended to change hands. So it's a very abrupt change in the messaging. But Jenna's Figueroa-Kettenberg, councilwoman, I think she's now council president. It was a really good question about how this regionalization is going to solve the inner working issue of staffing and management and other things like that.
So in your opinion, Mayor, is this a matter of lack of funding that the city has to put towards Trenton Water Works?
100%.
Okay, and what if you pulled a figure out of your head, what would be the number that we would need in addition to what we already?
The regionalization. So what he said right there, in 3 characters in a percent sign, he said that the reason for regionalization is 100% about finance. He somehow has that problem solved in his current day position. We'll cover that in a minute. All right, now Crystal has a really good question.
So in the report, it says, as stated, Trenton Water Works' primary deficiencies are either directly or indirectly attributable to organizational failures. Water treatment infrastructure doesn't run itself and is highly influenced by the people who are responsible for its maintenance, rehabilitation, operation, and proper maintenance, fail to follow recommended equipment, O&M practices, and a general complacency throughout the organization has resulted in a diminished technical and managerial capacity of Trenton Water Works. This inadequate organizational leadership has also detracted from the financial health of Trenton Water Works by allowing delinquent accounts to grow considerably. Further, the lack of Trenton Water Works and city staff who are sufficiently knowledgeable in financial processes and procedures inhibits Trenton Water Works' ability to have waivers and purchase orders approved in a timely manner, including critical purchases such as the chemicals. It says that it is necessary to address the capacity, the deficiencies identified in the report. If Trenton Water Works leadership cannot empower and motivate personnel to improve both their individual job performance and the assets of the utility, a change in personnel at all levels is warranted. Concurrently, a sizable financial commitment is required to adequately respond to the deterioration, right, of the physical assets. So with all that being said, and we've had this discussion many times before, some staffing is just inadequate. Some leadership is inadequate at Trenton Water Works. Things need to change overall. So, you know, if we bring in or we partner with the other municipalities with that, are they going to bring in some managerial staff that are going to help to oversee what's happening?
I'm going to pause it there just because but I do want to pick up on this theme here. First of all, I want to pause for a moment and just recognize how when others asked questions so far, there's been the mayor's given them an opportunity to complete their thought. You know, she read, you know, a paragraph out of the thing without interruption, right? She brings up a really good point about, again, middle management and staffing and all those sorts of things. And then we're going to jump to Councilwoman Edwards' question.
Council Vice President.
Thank you. A lot of what I wanted to say was said already. I just want to reiterate that specifically Councilwoman Feliciano and I have been addressing these issues upwards of 2 years. We have addressed the incompetencies and complacencies about the staff. Many of
Just give us the names and that I don't know that. So I would urge you to convey what deficiencies there are, what staff members need to go.
So DEP has been oversight for the past several years.
Yes, 2 years, for the last 2 years they've been here.
So this report states that there's been inadequate leadership, understaffing, and poor training, cultural complacency, communication failures.
Okay, what specifics are there? I don't necessarily accept everything as gospel that DEP said, and they've come in here a number of times since 2009, and we're on a cycle. We actually welcomed them in for the last 2 years, and we said, give us the deficiencies, but there's no specifics in that report. And if you find them, just please refer them to us.
Well, i.e., the employee that was falsifying records when he was
It's gone.
home. So I want to.
And there's systems in place to avoid that from now on. We now have GPS in Trenton Water Works vehicles now. We also are requiring the testers to take pictures when they're out on the field. So we've put safeguards in there so that it doesn't happen again. But that's one employee, and it's a shame that we have 150 employees. The majority are Trenton residents, hardworking. We have 3 really tough women that are running the filtration plant. DEP has pointed fingers at them, and I think that that's outrageous because I go in there and I see the hard work that they do. But I would ask for specifics if you're going to point the fingers. That gentleman who was the inspector, absolutely, the tester, absolutely gone. But I think we need specifics, even from DEP, than just a blanket statement that there's managerial deficiencies. What are they?
I think performance evaluations would have helped determine that. I think that there needs to be proper processes in place, just reiterating some of the things I've been saying for the past couple of years.
Okay, just give us the money to do that.
I got to stop this. This is like so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I'm just like, I can't imagine her being in her position to having to deal with this. Like he's like, is he bullying her? Am I going too far with that? I mean, he interrupted her like 5 times in her presentation. This last statement, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it comes down to etiquette. It's obvious that there's some animosity between him and some folks. The communication, even in public, with some people is different. And I get it, not everybody's going to get along, but for the greater good of the city, which is what everyone's supposed to be working on in this meeting, it seems as though it's a bit more personal at times. And I would also say that at this time last year, was this the early point where Jossie was maybe talking to some folks about putting together a team, to run for mayor?
I don't
And
think
could
so.
this have gotten,
I
I
don't.
don't know, man.
Maybe
I
it could
don't
have
know.
been. It could have been. To me, I was thinking about this a lot as in preparation for our chat today because I'm struggling to unpack why you would be so hostile to someone when you've clearly given and if you watch the full video and obviously we're doing little clips of it here, but he's very patient. He gives everybody an opportunity to speak. He interrupted her several times, and then this last comment just irritates me so much where he says give us the money. She says, oh, what we need are performance reviews, and we need, training, and his response is give us the money. And it just like that is so far away from how things work. The way this, if the mayor recognized this as a problem, if the administration recognized the idea of performance reviews and this training opportunity is a problem, it is up to them to present a budget to city council to execute on that. This is not, city council is not in a position to dream up administrative processes and ideas and pass them as budgetary legislation. It is up to the city council to bring these things it is up to the mayor to bring these things to the council, for them to weigh these things and to approve these things through the budget process and through whatever, if they wanted to outsource it, for instance, that resolution would come up and city council would weigh in on this. It's not city council's responsibility to dream up solutions for the administration. It's up to them to call balls and strikes on legislation. And that the idea that he suggested and put this back on them and put this back on her specifically to give us the money to solve this problem that you've been harping on us about for 2 years is really hard to watch myself. I want to jump over now to the mayor's newest presentation that he's done. So now I've got up on the screen, I've got his interview at the Trenton Journal. Our friend over there, Kenneth Miles, did a sit down with the mayor where he asks him about the water department. And so we get to see, this is recorded a month ago. Yeah, 1 month ago. So this is the new position on the water department.
With the regional authority, not only are they going to have to pay the $760 million capital improvement plan, but they're also going to have to compensate the residents of Trenton.
Notice how it's they now, right? It's like he's like pointing across the room at someone or referencing someone else.
It would be a taking. And so it's been estimated that the value of Trenton Water Works is about $700 million. So you're going to talk about a 28% increase if we're taken over by authority.
Yeah, I don't know where he gets that 28%. I'd love to ask him more about that. I don't really quite understand that. But did you hear him use the word taking?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the choice of words, it sounds like after council, someone from their council said, hey, look, you might want to change some of the terminology and things that you're using. And then 6-8 months later, it's now a bit more fine tuned, going on to Kenneth's program to talk about this.
Actually, it happened sooner. So if we play out the events that happened after the January 28th meeting, the mayor, according to Sean LaTourette and the August 18th presentation they did, according to Sean LaTourette, after that meeting, the mayor worked side by side with DEP and Sean LaTourette to develop an RFP to study regionalization. And they put out an RFP and solicited proposals that I think were due in May. And they're actually posted up on the DEP's website. So the mayor was still in lockstep with this, with all this stuff up until sometime around in the spring of 2025. And then Sean LaTourette writes a really scathing letter that gets a ton of attention to city council and says, hey, you guys got to do something. We solicited these RFPs. it's now up to you to just to give us the green light, pass a resolution that says you are going to work with us to hire one of these companies to study this process and present to you some of the options that you have for regionalization. And in response to that letter, that's when the 180-degree turn happened. The mayor, and I'll post a link to the mayor's letter. I'm certainly not going to read it. It's pretty long. But he uses the word, he describes it, he says something about the tone of Sean Luttrell's letter runs the risk of destabilizing all of the progress that the city has made in the water department, and basically plants that flag in the new sort of position that he has on pushing all of this off. So the other thing I want to mention to you, the tone of city council, and if someone goes back and watches the full comments and everything that everyone said, when he finishes and he asks for city council for questions, every one of them, with the exception of one, come from a position of like hostility and negativity about the concept of regionalization. So so here in this particular video, and this, not the one on the screen, but the one that we did from January, council was seemed to be reasonable about it and wanting to explore it. And now, and so everything changed. So not only did the mayor's position change, but it seems as though there was some massive change among city council as well. And I mean, I have theories about what happened and some of the inner workings behind the scenes. So I don't have anything that I could reliably report on, but I think anybody that's been around the city long enough knows, what the real story was and where the pressure's coming from to keep the water department in, under the city's control. Any parting words? What do you got going on? I'll give you a chance to wrap up, and then I want to hear what's up next for Trenton 365 and Jaw Media.
With Trenton 365, Jacque Howard, and Jaw Media, JE Media, going to continue to document modern history, provide spaces for people to come together in safe spaces with networking and entertainment, but all under the idea that we have everything that we need. We just need to work together in community to build a better community for everyone. So through friendships like the one I have with you, that's been, we've been friends longer than we've been alive, or longer than half the time we've been alive, basically. It provides me a space to spend time with folks, to get different perspectives, to gain more knowledge and understanding, and then to be able to share it with others so that I can continue to grow and they can continue to grow. So thank you for that. Jaw Media, Trenton 365, Jacque Howard. We'll continue to be here, providing an eclectic mix of content to build a better community for everyone. Thank you.
You're welcome. And we'll have all the links to your socials and stuff in the comments. And Jacque, 3/4 of our lives we've been friends.
Jeez, man. Wow.
I think I was 12 maybe when I met you the first time.
Yeah, it's probably right.
Yeah. So up next for me, I'm working on a story on a kind of a deep dive with the reservoir. I got a whole bunch of new documents from DEP about the replacement of the reservoir and that whole plan, and I'll be working on that in the coming days. But I feel like the Substack's taken a little bit of a turn with the content in that it's a little bit more deeper and collecting more documents. It's not these, I'm not in a position anymore to be doing these quick hits of hey, look what I found in the buried in the reports today. It's I feel like I've exhausted all of those those sorts of things, and I'm now looking at more of a longer form, kind of investigative work on some of the bigger stories that are a little bit more complicated. And this is right up there with them. The idea that this regionalization has had this complete 180 in just a few months, really. So it's, I'm really appreciate you taking the time to sit with me. I know when we first talked about it, I thought, oh yeah, we'll be done in an hour. Thank you so much for taking so much of your Saturday. And I look forward to seeing you soon, buddy.
All right, man. Love you, man. Keep up the good work,
Love you
and
too.
know that anything I can do to support you, just let me know. All right.
Likewise. Be well, man. Bye-bye.
You as well.